Europe has voted, and as you can see here, people across the EU choosing a new European Parliament. Early results show a swing to the right, led by the far-right Identity and Democracy group, which added 9 seats. The Greens and centrist Renew group were the night's biggest losers, dropping 41 seats between them. But despite that far-right strength, the 3 centrist parties have held their majority in Parliament. Now, this potentially providing a boost to Ursula von der Leyen and her hopes of a second term.
A bigger market story, I think, than many had anticipated going into the weekend. Now, in Germany, the conservative CDU-CSU coalition won, with the far-right AfD party pushing Chancellor Scholz's SPD into third. In Italy, Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy party secured the most seats, while in Spain, the centre-right People's Party gained ground, overtaking the Socialists to move into first place. And you'll see on this map a dominance of blue and green versus what you're seeing in terms of that red that we saw last time round, which had taken over. So certainly decline there in terms of that colour scheme. Now, the biggest news of the night comes from France. Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party gained 12 seats to secure 30 in total, with President Macron only narrowly avoiding falling into third place behind the centre-left. Now, in response to the vote, Macron delivered a political shock, calling a surprise parliamentary elections, with the first round of voting at the end of this month.
This is a serious and weighty decision, but above all, it's an act of trust. Confidence in you, my dear compatriots, and the ability of the French people to make the just choice for themselves and for future generations.
Well, I'm proud to say we've got a fantastic team across Europe. As you know, Claudia covering events with Meloni and everything that she will be doing next as well. We've got Annetta covering Berlin as well, and Olaf Scholz had a really bad night. Of course, Sylvia will be looking at things at the core of Brussels. But Charlotte, you have become the centre... And by the way, what a beautiful shot outside the parliamentary buildings in Paris this morning. Macron, I was actually, I actually searched up what throwing the toys out of the pram was in French, and I was going to bring it to you this morning. But actually, has he thrown the toys out of the pram, or has he made a very calculated gamble that actually, if Marine Le Pen's party does get in to form some form of government, she's got to prove what kind of government it is 2 years ahead, of course, or 2.5 years ahead of what will be the presidential election in 2027.
And that's really the key here, a huge political gamble. You know, that reminds you a little bit to what Pedro Sanchez did last year after he was trailing in the polls and called his snap surprise election. That's a little bit the element of surprise when President Macron spoke yesterday, just an hour after the results came of the European election, showing his party getting a bruising defeat so far behind the far right. Because look, the far right has been in the lead in the past 2 European elections before last night as well. But the gap and the advance that they have ahead of all the other parties was the most crucial element here at 31.5% of the vote. And if you add the other far-right parties, they are at around 40% of the total vote at the European election in France. The second was President Macron's party at just 14.5% here. So out of the 81 MEPs in the European Parliament, 30 will be from the Rassemblement National. And that's this huge gap, this huge advance that the country was taking stock of, and that's why President Macron then announcing, and now after the result, that he was dissolving the National Assembly, the building just behind me, and the narrative entirely shifted. It was all about this and what would happen, because the first round of this election will be just in 3 weeks. So that's the legal minimum for calling an election and actually having the election just 3 weeks before the first round, and the second round a week later. And that is the crucial element here. A parliamentary election is a 2-round election, unlike the European one. So the result could be quite different. So we shouldn't project entirely what we saw in the European results here, what it could mean for the National Assembly. But in the last National Assembly election, just a couple of years ago, the far right did progress. They came third as party in Parliament. So speaking yesterday, Marine Le Pen said that her party was ready for the parliamentary election and was ready to lead the country.
I can only welcome this decision, which is in line with the logic of the institutions of the Fifth Republic. We're ready for it. after the legislative elections of 2022, which designated the National Rally Party as the main parliamentary opponent. These European elections confirm our movement as the major force for change in France. We are ready to exercise power if the French people place their trust in us in these future legislative elections. We're ready to turn the country around, ready to defend the interests of the French, ready to put an end to mass immigration, ready to make the purchasing power of the French a priority. We're ready to start the reindustrialization of the country. In short, we're ready to turn the country around, ready to revive France.
And that's what was remarkable of this European election campaign, is that it wasn't on European issues at all. It was very much on domestic issues, cost of living crisis. It had a bit of a flavor of a midterm for President Macron, because this election was the only big one during his mandate. The parliamentary election was 2 years ago, and the presidential election is not until 2027. So that was the big election here in the middle, as well. President Macron saying, look, I've heard your discontent. It's only fair that now I give you the choice to vote again here on a domestic front. Now, when it comes to the dissolution, there's been just a few in France. The last one is in 1997. It was a pretty disastrous one for President Chirac, so we'll have to wait and see what it means here. But certainly a huge political gamble by President Macron, trying to catch by speed the far right and all the other party, and try to maybe kind of stop the progress of the far right, potentially, with having this election in just 3 weeks. But this could also open the door to having the first far-right government and prime minister. So the developments over the next 3 weeks will be absolutely crucial for France, but of course for Europe as well.
Charlotte, I just want to weigh in with a couple of twos here that could be relevant. 2 rounds of the election when it comes to France. How is that different as we talk about elections in France versus what we've just seen over the weekend at the European parliamentary level? Also, the other two here is that there wasn't just one far-right party that showed some dominance. There was a second far-right party to challenge Marine Le Pen. How relevant is that as we talk about legislative elections in France?
No, and that's really the key, that it is a 2-round election, and that means that in the second round, you always had this kind of cordon sanitaire. So if you had several parties going through to the second round, some parties would just drop out. The third or the fourth party, they would just drop out to leave just one party facing the far right if they got in the lead. But this has been kind of dissolving slowly, and the cordon sanitaire is not so much a reality anymore. So we'll have to wait and see what that means. But certainly in the last parliament, the far right was the 3rd largest political force. They had 89 MPs out of 577. The Renaissance, the President Macron's party, was still the largest one, but they lost already the absolute majority compared to the previous mandate. Now, the left wing, they had a coalition last time, so they managed to be the 2nd force in parliament. But they have had huge tensions within the left-wing party, between the Greens, the Socialists, and the far left. And so that means that this coalition could dissolve. That could also give some ammunition for the far right to actually score better. So all this is at play over the next few days, whether coalitions can be formed or whether this opens a big way for the far right.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed for that great coverage out of Paris, and we'll see you a little bit later on as well. So let's get straight to Brussels, where Sylvia has been digesting these results from across the continent. Sylvia, I've seen a couple of very interesting comments. Does it make von der Leyen weaker? Does it make her stronger? The argument that makes her stronger is she can work on either side with parties from the left and the right as well. Weaker, of course, but in some ways because the centre took such a drubbing in terms of what Olaf Scholz had, in terms of what Macron had in their results. But also saw a comment here from Simon Hicks, political professor at the European University Institute in Florence. Says, kiss goodbye to the European Green Deal. Why don't you just digest everything from your point of view?
There's so many things to unpack, Steve. First and foremost, what we're looking at is a more fragmented European Parliament that is clearly leaning more toward the right. However, the centrist parties still hold a majority. And yesterday night, they were telling me here that they will work together to make sure that the far-right lawmakers will not have a stronger influence in European policy making. Now, when it comes to the future of Ursula von der Leyen, she indeed can choose very well if she wants to work more closely with the centrist parties, where she's going to look more toward the right to get a majority in the European Parliament. Ultimately, what we heard from her last night is actually that she's going to avoid looking at the far right, because she said these parties do not share the same European values. Here's the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, outlining basically her direction of travel, really, for the next couple of months.
No majority can be formed without EPP, and together, and that is important, and Manfred, you said it, together with others, we will build a bastion against the extremes from the left and from the right. We will stop them.
So given the results, given the clear message from European voters that what they want to see is a parliament that it is clearly more on the right of the political spectrum, the question here for the European Parliament lawmakers is, can the right actually work together? And yesterday night I had the chance to speak to a lawmaker from the ultra-conservative group, the ECR. That's the same group that the Prime Minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, belongs to. And the message that I got was actually they're not going to look at the far-right lawmakers, the Identity and Democracy group, because they do not work well in the European Parliament. They do not do their jobs well. And at the same time, once again, they do not share the same values.
We have a program. We want center-right policy. So we have been working a lot with APP in the past years, and with other colleagues in the Parliament, actually with people who work. I sometimes didn't see some people from ID actually doing some work. Anyone who finds some work that they did can show it to me, then I will just believe that I'm myself, that I'm blonde. I mean, it's impossible to see any result, and we have some results. You can see it in the data, you can see it in the rankings, but which member of parliament from ID did ever achieve any result? I mean, you can work with people when they work. That's one thing. And second, you can work, we want to work according to our values. And these values are very clear: to serve the European citizens, to defend the European way of life. And we are against illegal migration, but we are not against people. We want people to respect the European values, to comply with our values.
Ultimately, though, what does this all mean? Guys, it is likely that what we're going to see for the next 5 years, it's going to be harder and slower to get things done here in Brussels. And indeed, to answer your question, Steve, perhaps climate policy is actually the biggest loser out of these results. I was speaking to a Green lawmaker yesterday, and he said that he does not think that the ongoing legislation will be rolled back. For instance, that includes putting an end to some diesel cars by 2035. However, the future, the next 5 years of policymaking here in Brussels when it comes to green policies could be at risk.
Sylvia, I just want to weigh in with some market reaction here, because we have seen euro lose most of its gains from the past month, and we're setting up for a reaction to in bond markets. It feels as though the environment has subtly changed after the weekend, where we've had not much politics in the pricing here. Just walk us through what you think may have changed now thanks to this result.
Well, it's the fragmentation, and it is what I said to you earlier, that it is likely that it will be harder to get things done. Yes, the EU, at times of crisis, they do manage to come together, even when the Council, the Parliament, is fragmented. So perhaps an event such as the US election could actually put pressure on the EU to come together. However, the outcome does suggest that it's going to be more fragmented European policy making. It will be harder to get things done, and naturally, the markets do not enjoy that.